everyone. So just to explain what's going to happen, we're not going to be able to take any questions. I'm sure you've heard this in the other panels. I have opened my DMs for the first time. If you want to send me questions on Twitter, please do so. Thank you. Please do so towards the end of the session. Anything else? And just let me know when I can start. I'm not allowed to start now. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the third day. So I've been here for the first time, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be part of the International Journalism Festival and in Perugia. So today's panel is about a sustainable future of newsrooms. My name is Shweta Bhandary. I lead the digital growth program within GNI, that's Google News Initiative, for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. So what we're going to do here today is I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions. Each of the panelists will give a quick introduction themselves, and then we'll start rolling. And again, if you have any questions during the session, just DM me, and I'll keep reading them out if I can figure out Twitter by then. All right, so the way people consume news and digital information continues to evolve. Newsrooms, whether print, legacy, broadcast, or digitally native, are evolving faster than expected. So how much of this change is actually sustainable, and for how long? So this is what we're going to be talking about today and delving deeper into. Again, thank you to the IJF for giving me the opportunity to be moderating a panel made of absolutely incredible women. To my left, I have Tara Lajumoke, Managing Director at the FT Strategies, which is the sister firm of the Financial Times. Got Lisa MacLeod, who is the former Managing Editor of the Financial Times and currently the Principal Publishing Lead of FT Strategies. And we've got Alexandra Borchardt, who's a journalist, author, and also one of our coaches at the One Ifra Table Stakes Europe program. So together, we will be dissecting the challenges newsrooms face today, the skills they need to foster them, and to remain a viable contender in this particular space. So delving straight in, what is, according to you, and anybody can take it, and maybe we start with Tara, what do you think, according to you, are the most important factors, in your view, that make a news organization sustainable and almost like future-proof it? Yeah.
I don't know if I have to have this pointing. Thank you so much, Shweta, and thank you to the host of the conference for having me on the panel with these amazing forces. And also thank you to all of you for taking time out of your schedules to listen to us and hopefully share with us as well. I lead a consultancy which helps media publishers to build sustainable organizations. So to figure out how to continue to fulfill their long-term missions, whether it's providing independent quality journalism or trusted facts and insight to the societies that they serve. So when I was reflecting on why I was so excited to be asked on this panel, I think for me, two things. One was the business dimension, which is this clearly speaks to the work that we've been doing with, to date, over 200 organizations, everyone from local news publishers to digital natives to international media institutions like the FT. But also, for me, it's quite personal as well. I sit on the board of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which is a fantastic non-for-profit organization that holds power to account. So the team of fantastic investigative journalists literally risks their livelihoods and lives to provide everyone with trusted insights and to help people understand how to hold power to account as well. I was born in northern Nigeria, and some of you might know in that part of the world, journalism is under attack. And there are, again, many journalists who are literally facing life or death decisions every day to try and provide us in diaspora and around the world with insightful journalistic content. So personal as well as professional. Do you want me to answer the question now or move on to, okay, sure. So what are the most important factors? My goodness, there is a very, very long list, as you can imagine, but I've got such distinguished minds on me, so I'll keep it to two, as I'm sure they will cover many more. I think, for me, the first thing really starts with customer centricity. And we were having a debate earlier over breakfast around, is it reader centricity, is it customer? You know, whatever the label you use, ultimately, it's about going back to first principles to understand who is it that you are trying to reach, what is the content that will engage that audience, and how do you do that in a sustainable way where you are able to stay true to your mission, but also able to build a long-term relationship that allows you to generate value, whether it's commercial value, reputational value, etc., that can be reinvested into your organization. So as an example, we work with many publishers, and some of them are predominantly advertising-centric in terms of their revenue model. And we often say, there is no panacea where it's, it's all about maximizing advertising or subscriptions or donations or events. It is about being able to build a diversified revenue portfolio that allows you to thrive. And to do that, you need to understand who is helping you generate that revenue. So if it's about subscriptions, reader revenue, who are those readers? What do they care about? How do they consume your content? When do they consume your content? Same goes for advertising. How can you differentiate your proposition in what is an increasingly competitive advertising landscape? At the FT, for example, we realized that we couldn't win on the volume dimension. So we decided to invest in building a distinctive value-based advertising proposition where we say, we may not be able to reach the billions of users, but what we can do is through investing heavily in first-party data to help you zoom into the precise segments that you are looking to reach, if you are whomever the advertising company is. So to do that, we have thought a lot about, okay, what do they care about? They care about reaching certain demographics, lifestyles, etc. So shaping our platform and content in a way that allows us to fulfill that customer need distinctively is a key focus. So all about the customer, all about building that multifaceted perspective and ensuring that everything, your entire model for what you offer, how you price, etc., underpins that. So I'll stop there because I think I've been talking for far too long and move over to Lisa.
Hi, everybody. Very nice to see so many of you here. I hope you can hear me properly. So I'm Lisa MacLeod. I work with Tara at FT Strategies, and I'm a publishing lead there. So it is my second tour through the Financial Times, which I'm delighted about. The first one was 12 years, doing many various roles, including commissioning editor, I was assistant editor, I was managing editor at the FT, and it was very involved in a lot of the print to digital transformation programs. So I've had a frontline seat, I always say, at one of the biggest, I would say one of the most substantial print transformation, you okay? One of the most significant print to digital transformations in publishing. Saying that, I also have a lot of experience working in South Africa, and I've done, I've very recently, the last sort of 5 years or so, have been a lot more involved with WAN EFRA. I'm on the board of the World Association of News Publishers, and as a part of that, have worked quite a lot with Women in News. So some of my colleagues from Women in News are here too, with a much greater focus on developing nations, newsrooms in developing countries. So I'm going to keep on bringing the conversation back today to say, while we may be at the FT, a lot of us in certainly in the FT strategy space have a lot of experience in other markets in the world as well. So we do try and bring to our clients a very, very balanced view from that perspective. But also, just to remind everybody that a lot of the conversations that happen in spaces like this in a beautiful Northern European town, oh, there we go, that's me. In such a beautiful Northern European town, a lot of the conversations are happening among publishers that have money and actually do have a sustainable future. And we need to always be cognizant of the fact that there are large swathes of this globe that are under enormous pressure. And for many publishers all over the world, particularly in developing nations, COVID was the last gasp for many of them. So I just think that's something that we do need to be aware of. So in terms of what are the most important factors that make a news organization sustainable, in addition to things like strong and visionary leadership and management, in addition to very good financial situation, I mean, these are all the things that everybody hopes for. As I said, I think depending on where you are in the world, those factors change from being, we'd like to increase our profit by 10 or 15% this year, or we'd like to return X amount of dividends to shareholders, to we'd be over the moon if we could break even. So it really just does depend on where you are in the world and what the pressures are. So things like working in environments that have a high degree of press freedom, as we know, it's a lot of the conversations that have been had over the last few days, a good economy, a high GDP, a high GDP per capita, access to data. I mean, coming from South Africa and working with many of the African newsrooms, for example, part of the reason that people can't access news is because of the costs of data. So data is a massive barrier to actually being able to access the news in an efficient way, to be able to watch news and listen to podcasts, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the kind of things that we always think about. And then, as I said, I think it's very, very important to remember that while not all newsrooms are equal, certainly we've been involved in a sustainability study very recently where we've done lots and lots of work with newsrooms all over the world. And the things that do make newsrooms sustainable are nevertheless the principles of good journalism underpinning whatever it is that people are doing. I often have publishers saying, well, I don't know how we're supposed to compete because, this website is giving everything away for free. They're doing exactly the same content as us. And therein lies the problem. I mean, if you're doing exactly the same content as the free websites, then you need to think about what your reason for being is and what is your USP. What are you going to do that's different and better and in some way more valuable to your audience than the pile 'em high, sell 'em cheap advertising propositions? So that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about. That was a long intro. Over to you, Alex.
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone, or it's almost the middle of the day. Alexandra, I spent more than 25 years in newsrooms of major German media brands, 15 of these in leadership roles. I was managing editor of Süddeutsche Zeitung, which is the biggest German quality daily, and then I went to Oxford to the Reuters Institute for the study of journalism and built up leadership programs for senior media managers and editors, and this is where I really broadened my international network too, to bring home all this knowledge that's spread out all over the world. And these days I'm engaged in several projects, and the biggest one is, as Shweta already mentioned, the Table Stakes Europe program, which sounds weird. Table stakes, this is a term that comes from poker, but don't let yourself distract by that term. It's actually a program that fosters performance-driven change. So that means it gives newsrooms the tools to drive change, and it's a program that works. With all my experience in newsrooms, I can really say it works. I've been a coach now in the third year. We've had more than 60 publishers all over Europe participating in this program now. The program that was born in the US, and there more than 100 publishers participated, and I'm really always very happy to see the impact when we take the newsrooms through this 1-year cycle of the program, what they are able to do then. The core of this program really, as I said, is performance-driven change, and it is really helping newsrooms, give them the tools so that they can really walk on with that. And that means big newsrooms, but also many of them are really small newsrooms. And this was really what Lisa just said. It's so important. We talk way too much about, what the New York Times does, what the Washington Post does, and Lisa mentioned we need to broaden this and take this all over the globe. Well, we also need to take this, from big to very small. So we have newsrooms participating that are just 25 people. We have newsrooms participating with a few hundred people in the newsroom, and everyone is able to drive change. This is really the core lesson that this program has already also taught me. You can start from a very different perspective. And now I'm getting to the things that are important to drive change. It's actually the willingness to change. And no matter where you are in the hierarchy, whether you are the CEO or you are just a team leader somewhere, everyone can start to drive change, and that's an important lesson. But you have to know, you have to build allies, you have to build winning coalitions, you have to start to experiment and really to create little success stories to convince others. And this is really about building coalitions inside an organization to drive the change. And when you have all these small success stories, you can walk up to your CEO or to your next boss and say, look, this works. Don't you want to try this with us? So it's more like it's a possibility also to drive change from maybe not the bottom of the organization, but change within the organization to win over people. But that's the willingness to change is not the only thing. You also need the tools. And very often tools are misunderstood as being some sort of tech, some sort of miracle tech, data, dashboard, whatever, that gives you all the insights to drive change. No, actually, tools can be just very hands-on. Like, for example, if you sort of map the supporters and the opponents in your organization, you might block change and think about strategies how to win them over. If you define your mission, but then also develop the strategy to reach your mission. So very, very simple tools that can help you to really have an effect and have an impact in your organization. I think the most important thing, obviously, is the audience centricity. We already talked about that, but willingness to change toward that audience centricity or customer centricity is really key to change.
Thank you, everybody. So now, I think each of you have touched on the idea of a local newsroom and a large newsroom, and often it gets muddied. We kind of group everyone together, and the challenge is that the local newsroom faces versus what a large newsroom faces quite different. So where do you think there are synergies, and where do you think there are differences? So in terms of organizational challenges, in terms of innovation, it's not always resources. So what do you think are some of the major factors where the two differ, how a newsroom operates from a local perspective versus a national, international news org? Anyone can take it, whoever wants to take it. Lisa?
I don't mind. I can have a little comment about it just to start. I mean, I think leadership and management is most certainly a thing. It's a really interesting question because we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to actually divide up newsroom types and different kinds of organizations, whether that is through the way that they actually make money. I mean, is a membership organization very distinct from an organization that is very advertising driven? I think there are commonalities across those, but a lot of thought is going into trying to understand the difference between these and what drives them differently. I mean, I think I don't think you can have that discussion when we think about, say, for example, local and national or big and small without thinking about resources and the extreme difficulty that is faced when attempting, for example, to deal with declining print, if that is a very big revenue driver or perhaps a traditional broadcast organization to become a lot more of a digital organization. I have seen time and time again, the way that companies are owned has a great impact on how they are run. I've seen many occasions where, for example, publicly listed companies that actually do have shareholders taking a lot of profits and paying it out in dividends, for example. Now, that's all well and good because that's what shareholders want. But to actually effect transition properly, there is a period, and sometimes a very lengthy period of reinvestment. And that is something that doesn't routinely happen in this industry. So when the money is going out the side door, back to the investors, the newsroom ends up suffering at the end of the day because basically that investment is not going back into the newsroom. So differences are endless, really, I suppose, in terms of staff, in terms of capacity building, in terms of skills, in terms of ability to hire, in terms of ability to attract talent, in terms of the actual investment that's sitting, in terms of the tools that are available to people. But the successful newsrooms, regardless of size, are organized, very focused on their mission, as you said. I think that those are things that we see, big or small, understand their audiences very well and understand their mission very, very well and are able to deliver that very well. So whether that's a membership organization or a reader revenue or even advertising. I mean, we're all saying, well, advertising is dead. There are plenty of publishers that are making a lot of money out of advertising still because they understand their audiences and they're selling their advertising in a very spectacular way. So, that's no bad thing if it's going to work either.
Yeah, Lisa mentioned a very important point where definitely larger newsrooms are at advantage, and that is attracting great talent, bright minds, and we really can see a talent crisis all over the industry right now. And obviously you need the right people, and not only that, bright minds, but you also need a diversity of people from diverse backgrounds to really contribute. This all said, I've seen small newsrooms being very successful because they are just more agile, they are faster, they are more driven because also they have a lot more pressure very often, whereas, I used to work in major media brands, there's a certain sense of self-satisfiedness around key players who feel like, we'll be the winners anyway, whereas with smaller newsrooms, they feel, if we don't change now, our very existence is threatened. So let's try this, let's try that. And I've seen so much innovation in small newsrooms because also there's a much higher degree of humility about, we really need to understand our audience's needs, whereas in larger newsrooms, it's much more like, we are used to our audiences coming to us, not us going to them. So really there's a lot said about small newsrooms. Obviously, it's not all bright and shiny because reluctance to change is anywhere. There's always a certain percentage of people who love change. Then there's, the majority of people feel like, I might want to change if, it makes sense to me, if it's explained to me, and if it's actually, I see it work. And then there's a small percentage of people who are really adamant against change, maybe because of certain personal experiences, whatever, or maybe they've seen like millions of change processes already. So the key is really to win over that broad percentage in the middle who are maybe undecided with a clear message, with clear performance indicators, and with success stories. And you can do that in any newsroom. You don't need huge tools and resources. You just need a lot of willingness to change and to set your mind to it and understand your audiences.
Thank you. I'd add one more thing, which is around the ability to collaborate. And actually, I think that that's something that smaller newsrooms have an advantage on. So we see often in a lot of the larger organizations that we work with quite deep silos, specialties, which then manifest as specific departmental agendas, right? And we know that sustainability is a multifaceted, a complex problem that requires a broad range of skills. So your ability to come together, despite your specialisms or departments, to actually focus on solving this complex problem is critical. And we try and work, for example, the work that we do with GNI, Cinema to Table Stakes, working with publishers to help them build sustainable business models, whether it's Subscriptions Lab, where we help them accelerate the growth of their subscribers, through to newer programs like Audience Diversity Academy, where we help them reach new groups of readers, whether it's younger readers, female readers, etc. A lot of the time we approach that program with a transformational, almost a bit of a change management lens. And one of the things that we have done quite successfully is this sense of a North Star goal, so making sure that everyone is focused on the same goal. Again, larger organizations far often have, departmental goals that sometimes conflict, right? But we've seen actually the smaller, for example, local players, there is clarity in that tight-knit community or team on what it is that they are focusing on, whether it's maximizing advertising revenue or optimizing for reader revenue, whatever that might be, and everyone working together regularly, collaborating with a set of varied skills. So, often you'll have the managing editors, also the digital editor or the chief revenue officer, right? So that ability to see things from a variety of lens, but also to deploy the skills and to work together in unison is incredibly powerful to achieving that. And large organizations can do that as well, despite some of those structural constraints. So one of the things that we say is, and the FT did this quite successfully, is having mission groups. So when we had our North Star goal of 1 million subscribers by 2019, we recognized that departments working in somewhat, isolated ways was a barrier to that. So we formed cross-functional teams. So we had people from the newsroom, people from commercial, from analytics, all working on a common problem, acquire or retain, and they had a specific set of outcomes, specific KPIs that they were measured against in terms of performance, etc. So there are ways to overcome some of those structural challenges, even as a larger organization, but ultimately it's about collaborating, working towards a single, clear mission.
So be agile, willing to change, and be willing to have a collaborative mindset. So Alexandra, I know you've written a lot about DEI and diversity, equity, and inclusion, just women in the newsroom, and Lisa, you work with the women's group as well, and we are all working on trying to start a new lab on audience diversity. So coming to the subject of collaboration and what it takes to make a newsroom successful, how do you think journalists in more practical ways can actually work with the commercial side of an organization to bring about change, but also in a sustainable fashion? If Alexandra, you want to start, and then free for all.
Yeah, what we do in the Table Stakes program is we encourage publishers to form, or newsrooms to form mini publisher teams. The word publisher is in there for a reason, because the publisher feels responsible for an outcome. A mini publisher team, usually in the table stakes terminology, centers around a particular audience. This could be young families and their needs. This could be an audience that's interested in building, living in property. But you could also create a mini publisher team around a different product, like serving the digitally activating the print audience, for example. So just a team that is cross-functional with functions from all over the place, from commercial, from the newsroom, from data. And the key is for this team to take ownership for results, so to feel really responsible to drive results, and then to think, delegate responsibility to that team, and then that team can come up with the different ways to serve their particular audience. May this be a newsletter, or may this be a podcast, to engage with partners from outside the organization to drive the results. Because the experience is really that a small team, cross-functional team, takes ownership and responsibility for a result. It will be much faster compared to something that's mandated by some whatever desk leader or some people from the top of the organization. And then success can really be infectious. If one team has a success story, for example, we have lots of teams working on, or mini publisher teams, we see that in publishers working on, for example, foodies, the food audience. And if they really drive success, if they drive subscription results or memberships or whatever revenue can be generated, then another team might think, oh, let's try that, but let's try that for parents in school, parents with school children, or let's try that for young audiences, and these success stories can be sort of scaled. You can scale it across the organization easily if a team keeps track of what really made us successful and what actually didn't work, because that's another important aspect, learning from failure or learning from things you tried and that didn't work out the way you planned it, and then checking your assumptions and then saying, okay, let's transfer this knowledge to another audience and let's go for it.
Yes, yeah. I think one of the key findings from the subscriptions lab, now known as Academy, I still need to get my head around the new label, is engagement is a critical driver for many of the outcomes that we value, whether that's bringing traffic back to your platform or it's converting from unknown to known users or subscribers or getting more donations. I think for a long time, we would measure the more sort of volume-oriented metrics, right? So page views, etc. But we really work with publishers on those programs to try and get them to think about more value-based metrics that give you a sense of how your audience is engaging with your content or product or service. So, for example, some of the publishers we've worked with, we look at refining how they assess content, and this is even in the newsroom as well, from looking at page views to looking at quality reads, so depth scroll of the article, time spent, and other ways of interacting, sharing, etc. And this is something that, in the newsroom as well, journalists can also encourage, everything from commenting with commenters on articles through to sharing on social media. But the idea is, how do you get more people, how do you reach more people, but then also how do you get them to continue to engage with your content and create this feedback loop that allows you to understand what people are consuming and why. And I think that's also a bit of a big cultural shift that, again, is predicated on this concept of really understanding who your audience is. And I remember a story, I was saying this to Dr. Lucy Kuhn over dinner last night, Casper de Bono, who set up the B2B business at the FT. He was so obsessed with drilling down the idea of who our audience is that he would literally print out photos of readers and he would go into the newsroom regularly and say, this is who is consuming your content. Her name is Shweta. This is how old she is, 18, obviously. This is what she does, and these are her habits and her life goals. And it's amazing how there is that big discrepancy between thinking about a particular persona as a content creator and actually being faced with the reality of who that person is. And of course, we need to be very careful of not suggesting that we interfere with the sort of, principle of independent journalism and staying true and, having that integrity. But I think having an appreciation for understanding who they are, why they're consuming, and engaging them to keep coming back for more is, I think, fundamental and a great opportunity for many newsrooms, regardless of size or maturity.
Just one or two comments. Thank you, Tori. That was very, very well put. The thing I think that a lot of newsrooms haven't quite consolidated yet is how much more closely editorial actually needs to be aligned with the commercial aspects of the business. And I always say this, I know it's provocative, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm still of the opinion that part of the reason we have been so immensely sluggish about changing as an industry and meeting some of the challenges is because there is a huge divide in our companies that we've built into our companies for a very good reason, the editorial independence, that many publishing companies have not yet managed to find a way to actually bring the producers of the goods that we sell, i.e. your newspapers or your content or stories or whatever, closer together with the people who are selling that, whether that be your B2B division or your reader revenue division or your advertising division for that matter. So I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that journalists and advertisers should be sitting and having lunch together, but I am suggesting that wall that was very deliberately built has also been taken to mean that it is not the job of journalists to think about the financial health of the companies that they work in. And that means that a large part of the workforce is very detached from the reality of what is going on in our companies. Not a large part of the most important part of the workforce is completely detached. It's not my job, it's not my business, this is not my problem. And as a result of that, there's often a lack of cooperation. And as you said, Tara, these deep silos emerge. It's very, very difficult to get people. So when we're talking about mini teams or we're talking about missions, editorial has to be very, very closely integrated into those mission groups, right from the word go, right to the end of that process, whatever that may be. If it's a project, if it's a new structure that's being set up, editorial has to be intimately involved with finance, with sales, with product, very, very importantly. I'm sure many of you went to the Millie Tran conversation earlier this week about the importance of product being very, very central to this. And then just very quickly, the other thing is, the second part of that is, if we can get editorial to collaborate and collaborate much more closely with the rest of the business, for editorial to be very heavily involved in the financials or the commercial reality of the business, the next thing is, how do journalists actually contribute to that? So when we talk about KPIs for journalists leading to the overall goal or mission of that particular company, how do you measure what it is that they are doing? And I think this is where Tara made such a great point about value over volume. We have for a very long time told journalists that it's clicks, right? So we've worked with a lot of clients that are completely click focused, and you know, in many situations, the biggest fears did come true. If you're going to chase clicks, you are in a race to the bottom for quality, and that has become true for many publishers. Now we're sort of changing the message and saying advertising has just gone off a cliff. Digital advertising is a very, very dangerous game to be playing right now. We've got the death of cookies coming up because of the privacy concerns. So what is going to be next? We need to focus back on the reader. We need to focus back on volume. On value, get away from the volume metrics. So how do you inspire journalists? And I think that it's quite a big change in the messaging, but also a very, very important one, because we actually are going back to quality. I mean, this is the thing. This is really about switching back to quality and thinking about how to really, really create audiences that are valuable audiences, not pile them high, sell them cheap audiences. It's better to have one reader consume 5 pages. That's the essence of engagement. Than have 5 readers consume 1 page. Okay, you're going to get the same amount of page impressions, but the engagement is that much more valuable at the end of the day. That was my short comment on that.
Love this question. I got called 18 years old again, so I'm like, I can be done now. So speaking of product, Lisa, because you brought up a very good point. What do you think, and this is for anybody, what do you think the role of data is within the newsroom? You know, whether it's analytics, the data integrity, the governance around data. How do you think that becomes a factor with respect to just building a more sustainable newsroom or news organization?
I mean, I'll start quickly and then I'll pass over to Tara. I mean, I think it's absolutely important. Again, thinking about the different size newsrooms, one of the things that's very important is to understand, for example, I know Tara I'd like Tara to speak a little bit about some of the Financial Times metrics like RFE, for example, how we've used those to actually drive to 1.2 million subscribers. In smaller newsrooms, question is really about finding a proxy for those kind of metrics. So what is the proxy for a quite advanced data science construction in a very, very small newsroom? So as we mentioned earlier, things like looking at returning visits, things like looking at recirculated traffic, things like looking at scroll depth, which we mentioned, dwell time. These are all engagement metrics. So it's about consumption per user, for example, rather than, and those are very good metrics that can proxy for much more advanced modeling on engagement. Sorry, Tara?
That's okay.
Or Alex?
Do you want to go? You go first.
Yeah, and my point would be that obviously data is absolutely essential because you need something to measure your success against, whether that is really audience engagement and it's about consuming news, or whether that is about achieving diversity, whatever. What doesn't get measured doesn't get done. I think by now that's a no-brainer. But very often lack of data is used as an excuse for not driving change at all. And I would, particularly those of you who were from small newsrooms, I would really advise against waiting for the perfect data set before you start driving change, because actually observations can also be data, or if you study your audience's needs, you can interview people from your potential audience. And so there's much more to data than just the perfect data set that is really for a large newsroom. That's of course a luxury, and it's absolutely essential, but really don't wait for the perfect data set.
Completely agree. I think that is such a crucial point. I think often we overestimate the level of sophistication that the data needs to have. Another one of the programs that we work on is Digital Revenue Launchpad, and the goal there is to start a new digital revenue model. And the first phase is all about researching and testing. I think the assumption, particularly for the smaller publishers who join, is, like you said, we haven't got the level of sophistication that you'd find in the bigger organizations. But actually, many times, even at larger organizations like the FT, we will do very simple tests, FT edits, which is our attempt to reach new audiences at a different price point. We called up 30 people and we spoke to them. We work with many publishers who say we have a churn problem and we need to analyze our propensity to churn model and do this and do that. And we're like, just call up your lapsed subscribers, ask them why they stopped engaging, or call those who've left. You find out so much from those qualitative conversations or observations. So to me, data is not, because we often say data-led. I think it's a guide. I think it's inspiration. But I think there's always a role for testing, for discussions, for intuition as well. I think on the data points, yes, we do use a number of methodologies for how we measure. We always say you have to measure what's important. You can't change what you don't measure. So there is a whole plethora of ways to do this. But as an example, one of the popular ways that we use is recency, frequency, and volume, RFV, which I'm sure some of you would have heard. And it's our attempt to try and understand how audiences are engaging with content. So how recently they consumed content, read an article, etc., the frequency of that, and how much of it. And each user is giving a score, and we actually have a particular score which signals to us as soon as a particular reader goes below that there is an increased probability of them churning. So that is, in a sense, a sort of catalyst for them thinking about, okay, what are some of the campaigns we can run to try and get them to consume? But ultimately, again, it goes back to the question of why. Why have they stopped consuming as much? Why are they scoring lower than the average? So I think having those insights is absolutely important. And the final thing I'll say on data is yes, the sort of process is important, the measurement and the metrics are important, but for me, the mindset is key. And I think having that appreciation for understanding what's happening with your audience, with your customers, and thinking about ways to respond to that, because data often tells us what the problem is, what the opportunity is, but your ability to be agile about thinking, okay, what does this mean, whether it's regarding to pricing or the content or the channels, is as important.
Yeah, I would like to add one more thing that is important, because data should be simple to understand, because the key thing is data needs to be used. If you have the most complicated metrics, fine, but if no one understands them, and even worse, if no one uses them, then you are lost. So it's really, really important to make it easy, accessible for everyone in the newsroom to understand what are the metrics and how can I act actually on them.
That's it, and I'll make one final point and then pass on. That's a good point. So one of the things that we do at the FT is we send out every single week an audience engagement, I'm sure that's not the title, email to the entire organization, including the newsroom, and it has some of the interesting metrics for that week.
It's called What We Did Well this week.
What we did well this week. Thank you. A lot more simpler. What we did well. And it's so insightful and so powerful, right? So as you say, there are all these metrics that we have, RAV, lifetime value, etc. We just try and strip it back to its basic principles of, most viewed articles, articles with the highest quality reads, most shared articles. And we also talk about the implications of that as well. We're seeing more and more people engage on podcasts for a particular theme. So it's informative. So the point about making sure it's used and embraced on a day-to-day basis, I think, is really important.
Thank you so much. So just to remind everyone, we're not taking questions. So if you can DM me, it's Shweta SB 1010. I will ask the panel questions.
On Twitter.
Oh, sorry, on Twitter. Keep forgetting that. So Lisa, you during your introduction, you did touch upon this, and it's something that's very close to my heart as well. Press freedom obviously is a threat in multiple countries. I come from a country that's struggling with this. But there seems to be a lot of focus on the global north and, everything that's going on in the US, or, we look at certain countries in a certain way and talk about newsrooms there and the way they are struggling. But there's a whole part of the continent that, the world that gets ignored. So what are your thoughts about the pressures and how they differ between the global north and global south, and why we should start focusing on underrepresented countries and continents almost?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I think that we feel very acutely at Women in News, particularly, is that the newsrooms that actually need the most help don't really get it in the way that they should. The newsrooms that have the biggest job to do in terms of holding authority to account and checks and balances on power. Where there's a preponderance of newsrooms that are really, really suffering in countries with autocratic leaders and demagogues, etc. So it's a real worry that these smaller newsrooms that have a great difficulty in terms of their business models. And really, I say this with my hand on my heart, I'd love to actually be able to say that there is a silver bullet and there is some particular solution for this. Really, really battle to understand. They themselves really battle to understand what their business models are going to be, and anybody who is attempting to help them is really battling to understand what their business models are. So let me put it to you this way. If you are running a print newspaper in an African country, in sort of Central Africa somewhere, you have just been through 2 years of COVID. There's a very, very good chance that the government of that country decided to close down the print press during that time. I mean, it's been a great opportunity for many governments to just shut the presses altogether. I certainly know in many of the countries I've worked with, the distribution of newspapers was considered to be a luxury item. So the distribution of luxury items was banned. Okay, not an essential service. Like newspapers weren't seen as an essential service. So many of those newspapers have lost their distribution channels altogether. Now, if the majority of your revenue is tied up in your print product and you can't distribute your print product, where do you go from there? a lot of them have attempted to then become accelerate, as they put it, their digital strategy, and what that looks like is PDFs, e-editions. Okay. Now, then advertisers say, well, we can't pay the same for the e-edition because the e-edition isn't going nearly as far and fast as the print papers were. Another pressure is that, in the global north, we have a very, very robust delivery service for newspapers, home subscriptions, very robust. I mean, I've worked with a newspaper in Austria last year that is 98% home delivery. The newspapers in the Nordics, brilliant postal systems, they get delivered by post, same-day delivery for post. In Africa, these are all point-of-sale newspapers, so if you can't go out to the shop and there's no home delivery and you can't deliver newspapers even if you have got a subscription service, what actually happens to your business? It is literally in the toilet. I mean, there's literally nothing left of it. So I think, I just don't know that there's a very, very good grip on those kind of, I mean, when we're talking about financial pressures, we're not talking about a little bit of pressure. We're talking about catastrophic pressure on some of these newsrooms because the entire business model has been pulled out from underneath their feet. Many of them have not had cash flow, so 2 years of no sales, there's no cash flow. So how do you actually start up your print contracts again at the end of this? How do you buy paper? Paper is a massive problem. I don't know how much it's been spoken about at the conference, but the paper prices are going through the roof. So this is another huge impact. It's having a huge impact on publishing all over the place. So now we're sitting with 400 or 500 copies on an e-edition, and that's your business. That's the core of your business. What to do, guys? I mean, think about it. It's just not really sustainable. And those e-editions sometimes aren't paid for. It requires tech to actually be able to get them paid. They don't have paywalls. The first cost, as soon as there's a pressure on cost, the first thing that happens is that newsrooms get stripped. Okay, so that's short-term thinking out of desperation. Strip out the newsroom, now you've really got nothing to sell because you've got no good journalists left either. So what happens is that there's just this cycle, and those little newsrooms are really, really, really battling, or not even little, some of them are very, very big newsrooms, really battling just to stay afloat. That's why I'm saying we just don't forget about it. If there's a way that you can contribute, if you can give some training, if you can offer some of your time, get on a call, speak to some of the networks that are operating in the developing nations and do what you can for them, because it's absolutely vital that we do try and help. Otherwise, there will be we talk about news deserts in the US all the time, but nobody seems to be that bothered about Africa, South America, etc., etc. Thank you, Tom. Okay, that's me.
No, perfect. Nothing to add to that.
Perfect. So we've got a question from Jodie Fish. Do you have any advice for successful and rapidly growing small newsrooms in getting funding and coaching? What are some of the tools that exist? I mean, I can talk about the Google News initiatives. We've got a couple of programs. We've got programs for journalists, and we've got programs for the business side folks. So if you want journalism training, there's something called News Lab. Do look it up. I think Matt was a part of a bunch of panels here, but he's Matt Cook. Look him up on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and you can send questions about this. He's probably going to kill me for saying his name out loud. So it's Matt Cook, News Lab. That's for journalism training. And if you want anything to do with the business side of things, and if you're EMEA-based, Europe, Middle East, or Africa-based, you can send me an email. It's Shweta Bhandary, and I will leave. You can actually just, somewhere, it's here. It's SHWETASB10, and we can go through all of the programs. So just to let you know, some of the programs that we're running is obviously with the World Association of News, Banifra on Table Stakes Europe, and we get about 24 publishers every year, and they go through a 9 to 12-month program with coaches from across Europe. And we talk about change management. We talk about different ways that newsrooms are evolving and what we need to do in terms of business models. And then we've got a bunch of programs with the Financial Times and FT Strategies that Tara and Lisa lead. And we've got everything from Data Lab, Data Insights Lab. We've got Digital Immersion, which is the basics. So if you're just getting started with your digital revenue, how do you start thinking about it? So you apply. And then we've got Subscriptions Academy that's starting in 2 weeks. That's an 8-month program, and you apply, and you get into the program, and you've got one-to-one consultation from the FT, and they help you figure out what your North Star should be. And then just keep a lookout on the GNI website, so Google News Initiative website, and there are all of these programs that are available.
And 3 of those programs have now been, in fact, we've done 2 already in sub-Saharan Africa, and a 3rd coming up now in May. Yeah. And I'm hoping that Google's going to extend that to Central and East Africa later this year as well, aren't they?
Yeah, I won't mention any other specific programs here, because also we are here to really push our programs a little bit that we believe in. But actually, there are plenty of opportunities, even small fellowship programs, whatever. So you just Google, because there are so many programs out there. There are many founders have understood that journalism needs support, and really there are programs. But not very often. Very often, people just don't know about them and they don't apply for them. So really, there's some on EU level. There are plenty of programs out there.
Thank you. I know we have about 6 minutes. I'm just going to ask one more question. If you have any other questions, again, DMs are open. I've never said that out loud, actually. So what steps can be taken to help news users find pathways towards civility? I think we've had quite a few panel discussions about how tense the news environment can get because of everything that's happening outside and within the newsroom. So what do you think, Lisa? I think this is something that you work on quite closely as well. In terms of like, there's intolerance, there's the bit of civility. How do you actually think about this within the newsroom?
Yeah, we were having a lot of discussions about comments. And the circle of life with comments and news publishers, because we've all gone through a phase of ditching comments altogether because of moderation, and now we're realizing that comments can actually be extremely valuable for a publisher. So when we're talking about engagement, I mean, a great way to get people to actually engage with your content is by having comments. A lot of publishers dangle comments as a perk. So if you register, for example, you can come and comment on our site, which I think is a very, very clever way of doing it, because it de-anonymizes your users to some degree. So when we're thinking about civility and the like, I think this is probably something that's been overlooked in terms of being quite a valuable tool for publishers, or not overlooked, shall I say. It's been discarded for many reasons. So, I think having some form of discourse on your platform, whether that is comments or very well controlled UCG section or something along those lines, I think we could actually there's something to be said for publishers actually owning that space as opposed to that happening on the social platforms. And I think this is a trend that we should be thinking about in the future, about how to bring that back. I've had some really, really interesting conversations this week about AI and neuro-linguistic programming and how to actually screen for incivility, using bots and AI and that type of thing. So maybe this is a space that we could be looking to in the future.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to do one more because we just got a question on hiring, and I know we were talking about that this morning. How important do you think hiring and your hiring practices itself is crucial to figuring out, what your long-term strategy is, what your North Star is, and things like that? It starts from the people. So how do you, if you want to take that, Tara?
Sure. And I'm sure others will have comments as well. I think it's critical. I don't think it's the only answer. I think there is a tendency to think, right, we need to get a new set of skills and experiences, which might be right. Let's go out and find new people. I think there are options around, obviously, bringing new talent in, which is a nice way to perhaps, disrupt the status quo even, and inject a new perspective, particularly when actually they're from other industries outside of news. We found enormous success at the FT and with many of our clients, hiring certain skills from, streaming or even the arts. So don't constrain your pool of talent to just news. But also you can retrain. You often have fantastic talent that already exists, and they may not necessarily have the right technical skills. So it's about trying to understand, okay, what is essential, what can be brought in versus trained, coached, etc., borrowed even, right? You can have secondments and other arrangements to try and infuse your existing talents. But it is critical really to being able to achieve many goals, whether it's innovation, whether it's diversity, whether it's data inspiration, etc. For example, we work with many organizations who are trying to attract a new sort of reader, and we often find that it starts with having those sorts of people in your organization, whether it's having more female readers, who are the people creating your content? Do you reflect that sort of diversity? And is that embedded in not only the types of content, but also how you position the content, the channels that you use, etc.?
Yeah, hiring is definitely one thing, particularly when you hire for diversity that you don't have. You have no choice but to hire new people. But it's also about development, and that should be a focus, developing people, and not only developing young and promising people, but you can also develop very experienced people who are in their jobs. I just listened to a panel on age discrimination or ageism as the last taboo in the diversity debate yesterday. Found that very interesting. So really developing people is important also to prevent burnout, to prevent frustration, and to really bridge that generation gap that is in many newsrooms, where you have young digital talent and very journalistically experienced talent that might lack digital skills, because actually retention should be your focus. If you have really bright minds, motivated people who want to drive change, you need to develop them to really retain them. It's so much more expensive to hire someone new than to have someone who you can develop.
No, nothing for me. I just agree with all of that. Thank you very much. I think I've spoken enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.